people ask me, how do you do projections, or what does that look like? And what about this? I'm never right. Even if I end up beating the goal that we laid out or getting close, almost never do I get there on the path that I thought I would get there. Inevitably, one month was surprisingly bigger. I'm like, how'd that happen? And another month was lower. I'm like, what happened there? But by having the actual of your profit and loss compared to the projected based on your budget and your projections, you can see like, hey, where am I missing the mark? Or something's changed for me that this thing's now important. Or it turns out we had to upgrade that other thing. So
Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business Unicorns podcast. I'm back with my friend Ben Pickard. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It feels like an eternity since I've been on the podcast, but I know our production schedule and release schedule aren't always the same. So I don't know what it feels like for you, listener.
Yeah. So, dear listeners, you might have heard Ben and I in your ears literally yesterday, but for us, we haven't recorded in, I don't know, maybe over a month.
Yeah, I've been traveling.
Yeah, it's been summertime. We both have just different schedules and haven't seen each other. So give me and our fellow listeners here some highlights from your summer.
Well, this was the last summer we had with our son before he started high school this year. So he's on week 2 of high school, if you can believe it. I don't think I'm old, but it definitely feels weird having a true teenager who's in high school when I'm still not even 40. We had some wonderful camping trips. We did a 2-week road trip to the East Coast with our family. We brought the dog. We stayed in Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton and walked on the Bay of Fundy because that's not the biggest magnitude of change in the world with tides due to something with the moon. And we also saw the West Coast as well. So my wife pointed out that we have seen 7 of the provinces in Ontario this summer, which is really cool.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Canada's only like huge. 13, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of land to cover.
They're big-ass provinces, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm so glad I know how much you and the family love having outdoor times. The fact that you've gotten so much outdoor time and see so much of the beautiful country that you live in. That's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you.
Good for you. Well, let's dive into today's topic. You recently were telling me that you had this experience at your gym of kind of going through like a re-financial planning process. So I thought this would be a great moment to kind of share that story and then go through some of our best practices for basically budgeting, but basically financial cash flow management. I know we talked before on this podcast about things like profit first, but I thought we'd just do kind of a deep dive today. So for all of you out there who maybe feel like you don't have your arms fully wrapped around your finances and you want to have some more sense of control, some sense of calm around your finances, some sense that you really have a plan and it's all going to work out, this is the episode for you. So maybe start, Ben, by talking a little bit about what you recently went through at your gym.
Yeah. So my fiscal year starts August 1st. So we're really just like early innings of the year. And every year we set new goals, which we'll get to later in this podcast of how to project your revenue. Mm-hmm. We set goals and be like, is this actually attainable based on capacity, demands, market, et cetera. So we're early in our year and we had a couple of changes. One of those changes is one of my dear friends, who's also my athletic therapist and massage therapist, is renting a room from us.
Cool.
So we renovated an extra room in the gym and we've got her in it now and it's great. We also had a long time coach leave and we brought on another coach. As of 2 days ago of recording this, I also promoted a coach to be head coach in my gym. Plus, Leisha and I are looking at doing some kind of just like touch-up renovations in our gym. We've got some paint.
Leisha, for listeners, in case you forgot, Leisha is Ben's GM.
Yes, my work wife, not my wife. So point being, we're going through a period of change.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not massive stuff. We're not changing our model. We're not getting a new lease, but it's enough change that me and Leisha were meeting. And she's like, we got new uniforms for the team. There's a lot of like small things happening that none of them are $10,000, but they're all like a few $100s, and pennies do make dollars. And she was just like, do we have enough money for all this stuff? Like, we're kind of spending a lot lately. It's a lot of change. Like, I just wanted to check. And I'm like, and then I pulled up our old budget. And I'm like, well, shit, the last time I actually did a budget in our gym was like 8 or 9 months ago. Like, we're due for a refresh. So I went through the process, which we're going to talk to you about now. And today me and Leisha met and I was like, here's where we're at, any holes in it, here's my assumptions, went through it all. And she's like, yeah, that all sounds good. Like we're on track. So even though it's not lost on me that the budget didn't actually change our behaviors in this specific case, but it did give us a greater sense of ease and clarity on moving forward on the things that we want to move forward on. So we can focus our time not on like managing the internal, but focusing on the clients and the team and the experience and knowing that like, hey, we're doing all these fun things, but like we're not going to burn down because of this.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I think what's so brilliant about that, Ben, is that in this case, the part you added was in this case, right? Because
yes.
if you would have done that rebudgeting process and learned, oh, all these changes we made were not just a couple $100, it was actually many thousands. And it was, to put all the numbers together, there's actually pretty big. We should change our behavior for the next few months. Maybe we need to pause spending in a certain area for a few months, or maybe we need to accept. So I think the fact that you came out the other end feeling like, okay, we're actually good, gave you the great peace of mind, but it could have very easily gone the other way as well.
100% it could have. Yeah. The piece I forgot is we actually had an increase in our rent due to like taxes, maintenance, and insurance fees, in addition to our base rent of like $1,000 a month increase, which was news, plus some arrears we owe. So it was, yes, sometimes it would mean, hey, we need to change this or we need to market more or whatever. But even when it didn't change our behavior, the sense of ease is priceless.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Just knowing you have enough money to play this game another day or another month in this case. Yeah. Yeah. Good for you. All right. Well, then maybe let's dive in for all of you listening, but excuse me, we have very in-depth playbooks for all of our Unicorn Society members where we go into depth about budgeting and profit first and all these things. But what we like to do on this podcast is give you this kind of high-level overview of some of the things we think are the best practices, so you can go implement this stuff right away. So before we get into the actual steps of budgeting, Ben, you just talk about some of the kind of guiding principles and tools that we use before we even do the budgeting.
Yeah. So typically we want to make sure in a perfect world, you'd be running a version of frameworks for unicorns. So you know how you're doing with your weekly metrics and your monthly metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd also be familiar with Profit First, ideally using the Profit First playbook so that you have the separate accounts and you're making the allocations on a weekly or biweekly basis so that you have an idea of what percent expenses are of revenue, for instance, or how much you're going to owe in tax as a percent of revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, for our listeners who maybe don't know Profit First, I'll just share what I think is the high level version of it, which is Profit First is like the process of having a bunch of piggy banks for your business. And twice a month, you take all the money you earned in those previous 2 weeks and you put it all in the appropriate piggy banks based on some percentage you've decided in advance. We're going to save this amount for Uncle Sam and taxes, this amount for myself as the owner, this amount for profit, this amount for maybe a rainy day fund, and then what's left over is my budget for all my operations, right? So this is kind of a pay yourself first. Well, pay yourself and Uncle Sam in the U.S.'s case. Pay your taxes and pay yourself first. Then save for, emergency fund or whatever else you need, long-term spending. And then what's left over is your operating budget. And then everything else you spend money on every month comes out of that one account. And so it's very easy to know when you don't have enough or you have too much, right? Yeah. And you can afford to spend money somewhere else because it's all coming out of all the operation stuff is coming out of one account. And that's like the simplest explanation I can think of for Profit First. But that's important because when you use that system, your budgeting has to align with it. What you're putting, the percentages you're putting away in your Profit First piggy banks has to align with your your monthly budget for what you think should be spending. Do you maybe want to go over some of those kind of high level percentages for people just to get some sense of what they benchmarks might look like?
Yeah. So typically typically what we've seen is best practice is keeping expenses excluding owner pay to 70% of gross revenue or less. And then you can break expenses into people expenses and non-people expenses. So people's typically 25 to 40% of revenue, non-people's 20 to 35% of revenue. For the astute listeners, I'm aware that 40 plus 35 is not 70, but the idea is that the ranges together typically make no more than 70%.
Exactly.
Because you still need to pay yourself. Those are expenses excluding owner pay, as I mentioned. And owner pay and perks can vary drastically. But we want to see it at least 10 to 15% of gross revenue, often in a smaller business where the owner is more involved. That could be upwards of 40 or 50% because you're wearing so many hats. And then, of course, we want to make sure there's some profit left over at the end of the day to reinvest in the business, build the emergency fund, and to pay you what you're worth for taking on the risk and responsibility of running a business like a gym.
Yeah, well said, my friend. Yeah.
Thanks.
Amen. Some people, I think, get hung up when it comes to budgeting because they think they have to kind of like budget for like the next year or the next 3 years. So you can talk a little bit about like forecasting ahead and doing budgets in advance. When is it useful? When is it not useful?
Yeah, I think once I tried budgeting for a year, and it was exceptionally painful and not informative. And I learned that it's, as we teach, not really recommended.
Yeah.
So typically 3 to 6 months in advance. Maybe, so that would mean arguably you're doing it 2 to 4 times a year. If you're in a sports performance gym with seasonality, you may want to, it's not just every 3 months. It might be depending on the seasonality that the athletes are in, because you're going to have major swings in your business. And I'd argue budgeting is even more important, because in some of the months where things are a lot slower, you might be paying for your staff in those months from the money that you made 6 months earlier. So budgeting is kind of a bit more mandatory for you. Typically, I will do my budget a couple times a year, or if there's going to be some sort of what seems like a major change, like I described at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. So for most people listening, budgeting for the next few months ahead is probably all you need to do. If you have a lot of swing in your seasonality in your business, you might want to think a little bit more ahead, especially if during those slower months you need to really rein in your expenses in a major way. You might want to be prepared for that. But you no need to go super far ahead and forecast like years or in advance. Not a really good use of your time.
No,
Yeah,
I have an accountant friend who is a very successful business owner turned consultant turned real estate mogul. And even in his businesses, he doesn't forecast more than 3 months ahead. So that's saying something when it comes to a gym.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think there's some industries that I think there's different practices, but for us, it just doesn't make that much sense. It's not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. No. Yeah. All right. Well, then maybe walk through people, like when you did sit down to work on your budget and create your budget, like what was the process you used?
Well, the first step was get a feel for where's our revenue going to be at, because when it comes to a budget, you're like kind of by default deciding to split up the dollars that you're currently making. Obviously, the hope is for most of us that our plan is to make more money next year than we did this year. So we've got more dollars to allocate. But the first step is projecting your revenue. And if you're a Unicorn Society member, we've got a wonderful tool for this that factors in attrition and conversion percentage and all these things called the Revenue and Client Projection Tool. If you're not in Unicorn Society, a simple version is just getting clear on how much money do we want to make a year from now. And let's say you want to go from 40 grand a month to 50 grand a month. Great. Assuming things are linear, which is never the case, but there's always going to be assumptions. That would be, well, maybe we should say 12 grand for easier math. You want to go from 40 grand to 52 grand a month. That's the equivalent of adding $1,000 a month in revenue each subsequent month. So then you can get a feel for, well, 6 months from now, we should be up 6 grand. 9 months from now, we should be up 9 grand. Again, your math probably won't work out quite that simply, but for the sake of explaining it on a podcast, that's an easy.
And that's always like a good first draft. And then you can go in and be like, okay, well, this money may not come in July, but it will come in September, right? Yeah. We're going to be slow during the summer, but then people will come back in September. So I'm going to take a few dollars here and put it over here. Then you can adjust for any sort of ups and downs that are really obvious in your business. But at the very least, having some projection of your revenue makes sense. And I think starting with the basics, like Ben said, of like how many clients do you think you're going to have, how much on average are you going to be charging, and start with just kind of some big picture numbers. Keep it simple. That's amazing. So that, I think you said, is step one. Then what?
Well, then the next step is figuring out your expenses. And the nice part of this is, unless you started your business today, you have historical profit and losses that you can look at. And one of the nice parts about our industry in particular in a training gym is our expenses are usually relatively static.
Yep.
Like our rent probably doesn't drastically change month to month. Utilities, even if summer, winter, if you're in somewhere like Canada where we have hot and cold, it's still not that big a deal. Even if your staff are hourly, typically their pay doesn't swing from $1,000 to $10,000 a month. So there's a lot of consistency here. So I'll look at what were my historical profit and loss telling me where our expenses for the last, typically I'll do 3, maybe 6 months. Which an important point here, actually, because I learned this when I was doing my budget, the number that I think I spend in my head and the number that is on my P&L are rarely the same number. particularly when it comes to things like office supplies is a good example.
Sure.
I spent on average the last 3 months $830 a month on office supplies. It was $10,000 a year.
Wow.
If you had have asked me how much this money does your gym spend on office supplies, I'd be like, I don't know, $300 a month.
Right.
So it's valuable to reality check to make sure that you're not way off the mark like I was in that case. But you're looking at your historical profit and losses. You're looking at your projections to make sure they're, make sense, as you said. And some of it is also using your judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some things you're going to probably know of, like, hey, I know we've got an equipment upgrade coming in the next 3 months. So and I've got a pretty good feel for what I think equipment will cost. So let me guess, and then add 10% buffer. So It's a mixture of those three things: P&Ls, projections, and your judgment as an owner.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. So step 1, project out the revenue for the next few months. Step 2, look back at your historical P&Ls, look at what your expenses have been for the last 3 months or so, project those moving forward. Then what comes next? So this is step 3.
Well, step 3 is you got to get paid, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be enough of a delta between the dollars you make and the dollars you spend, that there's something for you to pay your mortgage, feed your family, have fun, do all the things that you love to do. So this is where it can be a little bit weird, because as owners, we are incentivized for our owner pay to be as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we all know what it feels like to wear 17 hats in the span of a week. And sometimes it's worth us to pay for things and delegate those things out, such as I have a general manager. There's coaches that work for me. We have virtual assistants. I don't do my own accounting. So there's a piece in here where if you need to take a raise, you want to take a raise, you want to consider that. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity to see, hey, now that I'm doing the budget, what would it look like if I brought on a part-time admin for $800 a month?
Mm-hmm.
You can start to see, does that fit? And am I happy with what I'd be making for the next few months based on the model you just created?
Yeah. Well said, my friend. I think that, it's important. I'm glad you started by recognizing that, as owners, we're incentivized to pay ourselves as much as we can. It's a lot of times why we started our own business, is so we could benefit from the upside and, not have to report to anyone else and have a great lifestyle. And there's a balance to be had there between how much we take out of the business of ourselves, how much we put in. I think the one tip I'll maybe add on to what you said is that when we think of how an owner gets paid, we really think of it in 3 categories. Owner gets paid by their pay, by their perks, and by profit. It's really 3 categories. The pay is like what you pay yourself for your job, for the job you have operationally. Perks is money you pass through the business that pay for some of your things like cell phone, etc. And then profit is obviously profit, and that's part of what you're projecting out here in step 3. Yeah. Which brings us to step 4. What happens then?
Well, the next step is to update this frequently, ideally on a monthly basis. Yeah. So back to the story I shared at the beginning, had I not been dragging my heels on this and kind of forgot that I needed to do it, had I been doing this even on a quarterly basis, I'd always have a reasonably updated model. And that gives you the benefit of being able to test your model that you created. And again, this only took 20, 30 minutes. It's not a huge ask.
Yeah.
And then I'm able to compare that every month to how's my profit and loss actually looking? Are my projections roughly on track? Because I want to be clear. People ask me, how do you do projections, or what does that look like? And what about this? I'm never right. Even if I end up beating the goal that we laid out or getting close, almost never do I get there on the path that I thought I would get there. Inevitably, 1 month was surprisingly bigger. I'm like, how'd that happen? And another month was lower. I'm like, what happened there? But by having the actual of your profit and loss compared to the projected based on your budget and your projections, you can see hey, where am I missing the mark? Or something's changed for me that this thing's now important. Or it turns out we had to upgrade that other thing. So in a perfect world, you'd update this every month. And the huge benefit of updating it monthly, even though that sounds like a lot of work, is updating this monthly is probably a sub 30-minute task.
Yeah. And I'll say for a lot of you, if you have a bookkeeper, this is something that a bookkeeper can and should be doing for you. If they're going to update your P&L, then you just put this P&L right in there, or depending on the software you use, can house your projections. The software can have all the information about what you thought you'd spend right next to what you actually spend. So every month, you and your bookkeeper can look at and see what the delta was, where you spend more than you thought, where you spend less than you thought. And as Ben said, if you do this month after month, you'll get better and better at anticipating what your business needs. You know, those months where you need to pull back on things, those months where you can spend a little more, those months where staff has got to really come down in big numbers. Those months where you can buy that extra squat rack. I think the better you wrap your arms around this consistently, the better you'll be at sleeping well and knowing, keeping your finger on the pulse of what your business needs. Yeah. What else? I mean, I think that covers kind of the major steps here. Anything else that you've done at your gym, Ben, that you think is something our listeners should consider?
This is a really good example of somewhere where I follow our playbook really closely because it works really well and it doesn't need to be more complicated than this. Mm-hmm. Maybe a couple of principles that have served me that may also serve you. So the first one is, like, as I mentioned, projections are an estimation. Mm-hmm. And particularly when it comes to the financial well-being of yourself, your staff, and your family, you don't want to get it too wrong. And if you're anything like me, that could stress you out a little bit, and that you feel that cortisol slowly increase. You're like, oh shit. So the framework I use, or the principle I use for this, is I just assume that there's always going to be error, and I make sure that the error is in my favor. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is when I'm estimating expenses, I'll typically round up, particularly if I'm not sure. Now, if I know it to a T, I know my rent is exactly X, I put it in. But if I'm like, I think we're actually going to be increasing in our equipment expenses over the next couple of months because of blah, 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 and I think it's going to be $5,000, I might round that up to like 7 or 8 so that inevitably we never exceed it. Because if my budget is built for a worst case scenario and then we're wrong because it's not always the worst case scenario, I want that to mean there's extra money that I can invest in the business, take out myself, bonus to my team, whatever. The second principle for this is, money is a tool, right? And if you listen to this podcast for more than one episode, you know that we're not there's no photos of us in front of a rented Ferrari or, whatever, a probably rented Ferrari. So if making more money than you did previously does give you a little bit of like an imposter syndrome or a little bit of guilt or a little bit of weirdness with this, mm-hmm. Just want to encourage you, like, it's a tool. It's an amplifier for the things that matter, because we can't serve our clients if we don't have our financial shit kind of together, and we can't give our staff raises if we want to pay them what we're worth. If we don't know how much we're spending, we run out of cash. We don't know what we need to raise our prices for our clients or what awesome parties we can throw for them. So I want to be clear that, like, yes, you need to get paid appropriately for the risk and responsibility that you take on adding value to the marketplace. And this isn't purely about optimizing owner profit. Now, if that's what you want to do, like, power to you, no judgment from me, but it's really just making sure that you have your house in order so that you can do the things that are most important to you. And for most of the gym owners I've talked to, it's about that they make an income so that they can make an impact, so that they can have freedom. So money isn't the most important thing. It's just the thing that other things are downstream of.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. I mean, those are beautiful principles. I think you're wise beyond your years.
Thanks. The grays are coming in soon, I have no doubt.
Well, I think it's so true, right? If you're going to make mistakes in there, make them in your favor. I love that one. I think it's so smart to make sure you're padding one side and overestimating one side, underestimating the other side just a little, so you can make sure that there's always room to grow there, and that people have a complicated relationship with money sometimes. And so getting in front of that and making sure that people don't feel shame for paying themselves well, and give back appropriately, to their team, to their community, right? I think those are all principles that matter a lot to you. And I think, the ones that we share. So I'm glad that you brought those up in this conversation. I think it's a great note to end on. Dear listeners, if you like this kind of content, let us know. Not everyone wants to talk about budgeting and finances all the time, but we're happy to, because we know it's an important piece of running a business. Yeah. So Ben, thank you as always for a great conversation. Dear listeners, I will see you on the next one. Y'all have a kick-ass day. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.